And we're pleased to co-host this summit again with the Children's Defense Fund of California to discuss building resiliency for children and families of incarcerated parents. Our first event in June focused on additional trauma and burden children of incarcerated parents are experiencing during the COVID pandemic. It gives us a great baseline for understanding the impact of COVID and concerns families have around limited visiting and widespread exposure to COVID in incarceration. We were just beginning to experience the necessary experience necessary social unrest and widespread acceptance for Black Lives Matter movement during those days following George Floyd's death. Now we have the opportunity today to evaluate the changes and opportunities these days present for children and families of incarcerated parents. So I want to thank you again for joining us, and we have a dynamic and informative summit and panelists lined up for you today. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Shimica Gaskins. She's the Executive Director of the Children's Defense Fund of California. They are our partners in improving the services for children of incarcerated parents, and it's our pleasure to bring you to this conversation today. Hi, Shimica.
Hi, Carol. Good to see you.
You too.
Thank you everyone for joining virtually for this conversation. I just want to send out, I know all of us are sending out our thoughts and prayers for those affected by the wildfires, by the continued effect of the pandemic and racial injustice. And today we are talking about the impact on children with incarcerated parents and the double impact of the pandemic, and it's a necessary conversation as we continue to think about anti-Black policing and creating an opportunity for the often unseen voices of those impacted to really be uplifted. And so again, we're really thankful that we have a fabulous panel of voices from the community to discuss this issue today, and that we're starting our conversation with Lateefah Simon. Lateefah Simon is a nationally recognized advocate for civil rights and racial justice in Oakland and the Bay Area. She has been the president of the Akonadi Foundation since 2016. That same year, driven by the death of Oscar Grant, she was elected to the Bay Area Rapid Transit Board of Directors. She now serves as the president. Lateefah is also a member of the California State University Board of Trustees, and the state officials often turn to her for strategic advice on policy matters related to racial justice. Lateefah received the MacArthur Genius Award in 2003, making her at the time the youngest woman to receive the award in recognition for her work as executive director of the Young Women's Freedom Center. There's so many other things I'd love to say about Lateefah because she's amazing, and she's won numerous awards, including the California State Assembly's Woman of the Year. But I first will just say thank you for joining us. I know that this issue is personally important to you, as well as the work of the foundation, and we're just so really grateful for you to be here with us today. So Lateefah, I think one of the things that we have the lovely Carol Burton here with us, who's been in this work for so many years, conducting the most seminal research on children of incarcerated parents and really leading with so many others directly impacted across the country this conversation for decades. And what I find still hard to imagine is that when we have these conversations about criminal justice reform, we still aren't centering the impact on children really in the conversation. And now that we have a renewed attention, I should say, on social unrest aimed at ending anti-Black policing and brutality, and we're discussing more policy shifts, but there's still 2.7 million children that have an incarcerated parent. So what are you hearing and seeing in terms of how this current moment can really help support the movement for children of incarcerated parents?
I love this question. I want to make sure that I don't over talk. So how long do I have to answer that question? That's
20 minutes.
Okay. I really want to thank you all for having me here. And I was talking to CDS staff. I talked about how nervous I was to have this conversation with all of you. nervous because there are no words, there is no beautiful speech to convey the weight on the shoulders of so many folks in the state because of horrific policies and practices that have never centered family and that have never centered safety. So I give a lot of talks, but this one it's about home. It's about the grandmothers. It's about the babies. And so instead of writing a talk or talking points that are in some ways extremely inspirational, I actually want to talk about the war on children. We okay with that?
I'm okay with that. Carol, you okay?
I want to talk about the war on children, and because I think that that's what it is. So if 1 in 14 children in the United States have a parent in state or federal prison, we look at these stats, and depending on which publication you're reading, we will acknowledge the children who are also experiencing the incarceration of their parents in federal detention camps, ICE camps, and county jails, and hospitals, and parents that for many reasons no longer have contact with their children. But I want to talk about the work that you all are doing in a human rights frame, because for so many reasons, the young people and the people that they love behind bars and the folks who are on the outs are oftentimes not given the sanctuary as we talk about them and us in our experiences, as we think about this sort of the global problem of the war on children. So at this juncture in human rights history right now, indeed, I think it's important that we talk fearlessly about what's at stake. And for me, these fearless leaps towards justice, this racial reckoning, many of us have been reckoning for decades, and some might say centuries, but we have to be willing to think about and talk about the tragedy of the carceral state. So I can't talk to you about the resiliency of folks who have been holding the world up on their shoulders without giving the clarity that in the United States and right here in California, we're talking about the immediacy of structural racism and how it is inseparable for the struggle of human rights for children of incarcerated parents. So I want to talk about this war. And I want to be really clear. And many of you who are watching, you all have raised me in this work for 25 years. I started doing organizing as a very, very young woman. And I've seen in my own family, on my own block, all throughout California and throughout the country, the lack of praise for women like Toni Bambara, who is an unsung Black heroine, a woman who has been pushing forward in the South a voice around children of incarcerated parents. And she talks in many of her talks and in her writings about what we must do in this moment and what we must recognize. And she says to us, 1, let's be clear, we are at war. And 2, the natural response to stress and crisis is not the breakdown and capitulation, but a transformative opportunity for renewal. So as we think about where we are, she says these opportunities provide an opportunity for us to move forward through transformation and renewal. And that 3, she says, the natural response to oppression and ignorance and evil and mystification is a wide awake resistance. So CDF, today, you all are moving through a wide awakened resistance. So as we talk about and answer your question, it's important to lift up the children in California. It's important to lift up the children of California, but it's important for us to also understand that those children are in community with the other children around the world who are also suffering. So as we think about young people in Oakland and in San Diego and in Los Angeles and in Fresno and in Sacramento and Richmond who are living in group homes or with kinships, we think about their parents who are suffering in cages, and we think about and lift up the advocates who are loving them. We also think about the children of Yemen one of whom is dying every 10 minutes, or the Rohingya children, among whom 43,000 parents are missing. This is a war. And for the Black and brown children in the United States, we know too that they are unfortunately also subject to this war on children. You know that in our country, we are the global leader. In this country, we're the global leader of incarceration. We have 4% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. And you know that the majority of incarcerated Americans are parents. 10 million of our nation's children. And I know based on when and how you read, that number will shift. 10 million and counting of our nation's children, half of whom are under 10 years old, have experienced the removal of a parent from their lives due to mass incarceration. 10 million. And 1 in 9 of these children is Black. 1 in 28 are Latino, while 1 in 57 are white children. For the Black and brown children of California, I want to reiterate that they are soldiers in a war that they did not begin. Nearly 60% of Black 5th grade boys and 53% of Black girls enrolled in Oakland public schools have experienced the violent death of a family member. I don't want to mince words about what we are lifting up and how we are loving on these children, and they are teaching us how to love in the midst of deep struggle. Meanwhile, there's 1 school counselor for every 2,000 students in the city of Oakland trying to learn and grow and be whole. This is why only 30% of Black children graduate from middle school in Oakland and less than 40% graduate from high school. We can end this war by prioritizing the sanctity of children. And instead of correcting the problem, unfortunately, even progressive and moderate electives throw gas on the flames. I told you today that I wasn't here to mince words. Our tax dollars are shipped off into incarcerating young people and their parents. And the amount spent on youth imprisonment has only doubled in recent years in a state that has committed to reform. In Alameda County alone, we spend $135,000 per year to incarcerate 1 young person, knowing that their families have suffered through a carceral system that hasn't created more peace, more safety. And like the growing numbers of homelessness in each of our cities, on each of our blocks, Black children too sleep on concrete and in cages. Now, I gave you a lot of pathology, but I want to talk about the beauty. I want to talk about what life will look like in peaceful times when we win. Because our mission, all of our missions, are to manifest this dream, this North Star of justice. Here in each city, throughout the state and throughout the world, we together are building something that we've never seen before: justice and a future filled with liberation for our children. We can reconcile all the work that we've been putting in for so many years when we think about the possibility of our children having an amazing education, places to play and clean air to breathe, a possibility of breaking down structures that don't work, creating and reimagining what safety can look like. Not just bringing parents home, that's at the bare minimum, but deeply moving forth policies and practices that encapsulate our dreams so that families can eat, they can have roofs over their heads, and that we can think about what we do when we're done wrong. What can accountability look like? And show our children that it's not just throwing people in dark cages. CDF, I thank you for bringing us together. And as I conclude, I want to ask you to walk with me just for a second. So much of what we all do, we've committed our lives to making our politics, our heartbeats actionable. And we focus on the micro and the macro. But remind yourselves that as we make this work actionable, this work is sacred. Children are sacred. And together we move through solidarity and we dig deep in the soil. And we remind ourselves that children should be free as should their parents. And we re-examine what freedom should look like and feel like and taste like. If we will truly continue to commit ourselves to make human rights real for the children of California who've experienced mass incarceration, as we make these demands actionable, we must specify exactly what it is we can and therefore must do. So as you, but also what all know so well, as champions of this work, there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of tears to wipe. There's a lot of beds to tuck in. There are a lot of cages to open up. And it's okay to have these bold goals. It's okay to have these bold goals. It's okay to think about what life will be like in 15 years, what life will also be like on Saturday. Let me be transparent. I'm asking all of us to commit to a new future where we push beyond transformation, where we push towards a world without prisons, a world without early demise, a world far away from pathology. And let's bring human rights here, right at home. Thank you so much for having me today. And again, I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Lateefah. We are just so happy that you are such an important voice, a truth teller in this moment and always. And I know everyone listening is as inspired as I am about the vision and about the candidness on the war on children. I think one thing that I would love to hear your thoughts on is, in this moment, often you have a very important role in philanthropy. I know there's not many women that look like you, that talk like you, that have the experiences, that have walked the walk that you have coming into those spaces. And, in this moment, we're talking about the need for systemic reforms, but we also know, as you said, there are organizations on this phone call who are doing the day-to-day work of wiping the tears, driving kids down the buses on Saturday to see their parents, making sure that kids have what they need. And how do we make sure that they aren't forgotten in this conversation around, investing in dollars to move systemic change? Because oftentimes it's sort of pitted as an either or. And so I wanted to hear what your thoughts are on that.
I think that's such a great question. And, for years when I was running the Young Women's Freedom Center as a very young ED, and then I went on to work in other sort of larger institutions. I did some work in the DA's office when Kamala Harris was the DA and ran her reentry programs. And I definitely saw and experienced this dichotomy. I'm constantly learning from other funders who are breaking these silos down. And LaJune Montgomery, who is a dear mentor of mine, she runs the Kellogg Foundation. And she was one of the first sisters who called me when I got this job. And she said, you have to, as a Black woman, think about your work. And you have to think about your life and what you've seen and what you've experienced. You know that the breakfast program of the Black Panther Party was as important as the action at the Sheriff's Department. And so if you're an ED of an organization, you're an organizer, you are a child care worker, you run the soup kitchen, it's important for us to understand politically and historically that our folks don't get free just by holding the megaphone. And we also don't get free just by feeding our children. We have to do both. And it's the same work. It is holding up, you know, the mantle of Harriet Tubman and saying, I'm going to hold the babies and take them from the beginning to the end. And our freedom doesn't just look like advocacy, and it doesn't look like service, it looks like liberation. So everything that the folks who are gathered here today, all that we are doing is that work. So it's important. And I will never forget, you know, when I was running the Center for Young Women's Development, now called the Young Women's Freedom Center, and a funder looked us right in the face, mostly all young teenagers, all in the juvenile justice system. Most of our parents had been through systems or been through addiction, and we were working with other young women on the streets, and we were providing referrals, and we were doing what we thought was some of the most important organizing. But to this, you know, white-run progressive foundation, it wasn't good organizing. And it hurt me in a way that I'll never forget. And I have to work with this woman 25 years later. She is a funder. But our job is to always educate, and it gets exhausting, sisters and brothers, folks, siblings, it gets exhausting. But our job is to transform every room we go into. That's our anointing. That's why we came to the work, that if you are picking babies up, you are doing violence prevention. You are building a base. If you are a foster parent, right? You are doing the work of the Fannie Lou Hamers and the Harriet Tubmans. You are doing beloved community work. It is advocacy every single time you get on the phone to a teacher to advance the goals on that IEP. If you're running a progressive and beautiful group home, if you're running an organization that's bringing letters into the jail every Sunday, if you are doing courtroom watches, if you are escorting babies, you know, into trial to see their parents fight for their rights on both sides of the chair, whether they be victim or the accused, we are a part of a movement that is so much deeper than anything that you will write in a grant application. And that said, I'll close here. It still doesn't translate everything that I said to groups getting what they need. So, you know, maybe as we move forward, as folks are now seeing the whole full lives of people of color who are fighting against carceral systems that have had their knees on our necks for years, folks will begin now to realize what it actually takes. When systems come in and literally break down doors of houses and take out parents, what it takes to ensure that everyone who experiences that doesn't carry on that trauma for 7 more generations. We are the teachers, really, of the impact of the sins of the state. So let us all be clear, we are all doing movement work. We are also all doing service work, because service work is movement work, and back and forth. That makes sense?
It does, it does. And before we close out with our gratitude, I just wanted to give Carol opportunity if she had.
No, I thank you for the words of inspiration, and you always inspire us and ground us with the truth. So I appreciate you, and on behalf of Bay Area children of incarcerated parents, we all love you and support you. You're our champion. Thank you.
Yes,
I just want to say, Carol, looking at you, it almost makes me want to cry, because I know what you've done for us. I'm talking about the babies of the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. This has been your gospel for a generation plus. You have given the issue so much humanity. These are, again, children, but for no fault of their own, have to, again, carry the joys, the loves, and the pains of all that has been pushed on them. And they are expected to show up to school every single day and learn like their counterparts who have never experienced racist systems. They are asked to walk in the world and forgetting those images of their parents being thrown on the ground. They are asked to go to school on Monday after standing in line for 5 hours to get 30 minutes with their parents, and they are given the exact same expectation to move forward. And you've been the one to say, no, 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 no. Look at the impact on systems and how they treat children. You have humanized these babies. You are fighting for their very childhood, for the magic of childhood. And you said that in one of your talks. Childhood should be magical. So thank you for that. Our children are adultified all the time, each and every day. Little Black boys are not supposed to be little Black boys, but young men. You are fighting for the child, and we just love you so much. So thank you so much for your work. You push us to be better. Thank you.
Thank you, Lateefah, and we will look forward to seeing all the great things that you continue to do. And she really did make me cry, Carol, because you know you are my shiro. Because
Yes.
it wasn't until I saw your work that I saw myself and understood my earliest memories. So thank you so much. Now we're going to move to our second panel today, where we are really excited for our moderator, Kanwarpal Dhaliwal, who will be moderating this panel. She's the co-founder of the Nationally Organized Youth Center in Richmond, California, or one of the co-founders of RYSE, and she currently acts as the associate director. As associate director, she supports and guides the implementation and integration of healing-centered practices grounded in racial justice and liberation across all of RYSE's program areas. She also develops and promotes and advocates for policies, investments, practices, and research that enliven healing, justice, and liberation across all areas of their work. Kanwarpal believes that the purpose of her work and life is to contribute to movements, communities, and legacies of liberation that honor the ancestors who fought for her existence and survival, and to forge a world that is just and gentle for future generations. Good morning. Thank you for joining us, Kanwarpal.
I'm so grateful to have been asked, invited, and trusted to be a part of this conversation. I want to thank and echo Carol and Lateefah, what amazing power and love and fortitude to follow. And I also want to thank the young people who organized for RYSE, which is the organization I work with. Young people who at 15, 16, 17, young people of color, Black and brown young people who organized for a space that they knew that they would never directly benefit from, but were thinking of their 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old siblings, cousins. I'm thinking of the next generation when they also should have been able to just experience the magic of being children. So I'm here because of because they were warriors, they were healers, and they were thinking about legacies. So with that, it's always important to share that that's who I'm here in service to and because of. And I'm very excited to be able to be part of this panel. I know I'm a moderator, and I'm telling you, I'm on a lot of meetings, and moderating is making me feel hella nervous. So I just had to say it, to get it out there. It's a whole new way of being. So thanks for pushing me to do this. And I trust we're all gonna get what we need because we all come with what we already have and what we already need. So with that, what I'm gonna do is I get to spend the next time with our lovely panelists who I'm gonna introduce briefly, and then they will talk about their work. I'm gonna introduce them, and we have a set of questions that we're gonna ask the panelists. Some of them will go back and forth, but what I wanna invite and offer and ask our panel is, I ask you to say what needs to be said. So it doesn't matter what question I ask. If you want to answer it, feel free, but please feel free to answer what you feel called to, because this is all of it's important, and we know that this is one beloved space in which the work continues. So that said, I'm going to name everybody that we have, and then we'll go into the questions. So we have Alyssa Tamboura. Alyssa, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Who's with Walter Bridges of the Conflict Resolution Center of Santa Cruz County. We have Anthony Funes of the Youth Action Council of the Osborne Association. Anthony, did I pronounce your name correctly?
It's pronounced Funes.
Funes, Anthony Funes, thank you, my apologies. We have Allison Hollihan, who is the Senior Policy Manager at the Osborne Center for Justice. Did I pronounce your name correct? Great, thank you. And we also might be joined by David Mendoza, or Daniel Mendoza, I'm sorry, of Courage. And we'll be happy to bring Daniel in, and we're gonna continue to go with the panel. So my first question, and again, this is a question you can answer or not in any way that feels comfortable for you, is for Alyssa, and that is, what have these moments, the moments that we're in, kind of the compounded pandemics, what have they made both visible for you personally and professionally, but also visceral, right? Because even as Lateefah reminds us, this work is heart work, it's soul work. So viscerally and visibly, what's been the impact of the moments we're in?
Thank you. What a great question. I'm really glad to be here. I want to just preface my, whatever I share with everyone today by saying that I am an adult child of a formerly incarcerated parent. My father was incarcerated in San Quentin for about 13 years from when I was 9. He came home just a few years ago when I turned 23. And so, yeah, I'm an adult child of an incarcerated parent, directly system impacted, and very, very honored to be here today and speak with you guys and share my own experience and perspective. So I think that this moment is really interesting. And I think that that question is really interesting because, we turn on the news, we open our phones, we open social media, and we're seeing a lot of coverage of the coronavirus, the pandemic, how it's affecting, poor communities, Black and brown communities. We're even seeing how it's affecting the currently incarcerated, right? Like there's been a lot of coverage on what happened in San Quentin with the outbreak there, the lives that are lost. There's a lot of push and movement with the Black Lives Matter movement after the murders of our brothers and sisters, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. There's just so much going on. And in my work with system impacted families, I call parents and caregivers on the outside of children of incarcerated parents, weekly. And one thing that's been communicated to me is that they still feel invisible, even in this moment of like reckoning, so to speak, in our country, and like this awareness on how incarceration has impacted Black and brown lives. There's still this conversation not being had about children of incarcerated parents and the impact on their lives. There's not a mainstream push. You don't open your phone and see something about a child of an incarcerated parent or like how they're struggling in school. I talk to parents and they're losing jobs because of the pandemic. They are having to move because they can't afford the rent because, their other person has now become incarcerated, or their job was helping them sustain themselves, but now they can't because of the pandemic. And all while having to manage the feelings of children missing their incarcerated parents and also do online learning or even no learning at all. And so I would say that this moment is interesting in that there's visibility for some of these issues, but at the same time, there's still a lot of that invisibility that this community, like my community, has faced. And then just personally too, as far as what's visceral, the uncertainty of the pandemic is so unsettling. Like, we don't know when the kids are going back to school. We don't know when, we're going to return to some level of normalcy. There's so much uncertainty. And for me, the last time I felt this uncertain was when I didn't know when my father was coming home, when I had no idea that, one, he was even incarcerated, two, if he was being sentenced. And then even when I did find that out, okay, well, when's he coming home? As a child, you don't have that concept of time. And so what this moment highlights again is like, there's this uncertainty of the pandemic. And then for children, like this added uncertainty of like, when am I going to see, talk to, or, be able to touch my parent? Like the added stresses of incarceration in the daily lives of these children on top of everything else that all of us are going through. And so I just ask people who are listening, like, reflect on how you've been feeling during the pandemic, and then add on and compound more and more trauma. And that's what children of incarcerated parents are feeling right now. So I hope that answers your question. And, if any of my other panelists want to join in or add anything, please do so.
Thank you for starting us off, Alyssa, which I know it was not a easy check-in question. We went right to it. So thank you for both speaking, integrating heart, mind, spirit. And I am wondering, Anthony or Allison, would you like to also share just what has been more visible, visceral for you and the communities that you're in?
You guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the thing that's been most visible to me is the importance of building better bonds with families and the strain on education, as my fellow panelists mentioned. It's very hard for me personally, being that I'm in school and I currently have to take classes online. It feels like if I was in the position that my father was in, like being locked up, isolated from the outside world. And it's a new experience, but with the resources provided to me with all of the after school programs that I'm in, it's easier to deal with.
Yeah, and I would add to what Anthony said about family bonds is that, you know, visiting in most jails and prisons across the country has been suspended since March. And so children who had been visiting their incarcerated parents don't have the ability to see them, to check in on them, to see if their parent is okay, to talk with them about the struggles that they're having with feeling isolated, to get that support, to really just have a parent in their lives. And in many instances, phone calls are challenging too, right? Because as facilities go on lockdown and people are put into quarantine, they don't have access to the phone. And so it's the very time that families are in need of having contact and conversation and access to each other to support each other. For children who have incarcerated parents, that's really been upended as well.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, all of you. I'm wondering, you know, as and actually, let me say for all our participants, please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, and be sure to use the all panelists and attendees so everybody can see comments and questions. So please do use that function. And, you know, I'm wondering, you know, Lateefah talked about the war on children, and all of you here are warriors, are healers, are in it, right at the center. And just wondering if you can share more in what's comfortable, what both sort of do you feel like harms, like when you're thinking about school, when you're thinking about service providers, when you're thinking, I mean, honestly, even just about adults in your lives that have, like myself, chosen and are, you know, able to work with young people and in community. What's helpful, what's harmful, what do we need to know to make sure that we're actually showing up righteously?
I would like to answer that question.
Thank you.
So I think the importance of after school programs, or like a main part of that for me personally, is the Youth Action Council and Youth Experience Success and Echoes of Incarceration. Like all of these programs helped to provide a sense of support for me and other teens undergoing similar situations. So the main mission, like when speaking about the criminal justice system, is to help. So I don't personally have experience with what harms, but my participation in learning skills on communication and self-care and helping others, it really helps to make a better place for future generations.
Thank you, Anthony. Alyssa, did you want to share, offer?
Sure, I can answer that question. So, what harms children of incarcerated parents? Oh yeah, and thank you, Anthony. That was a really great response. So, what harms children of incarcerated parents right now? The first thing that's coming to mind is something actually my grandma told me growing up. My grandma was one of my primary caregivers while my father was incarcerated. You know, she used to tell me, bless her soul, you know, you have to work twice as hard to have what other people are freely given, not only as like a young black and Latina woman, but also as someone, you know, who has a father in prison. And I want to really push back on that narrative, especially if we want to acknowledge the trauma that children are facing right now, particularly Black and brown children, particularly children of incarcerated parents, like really push back that we cannot take the time to do self-care, like Anthony was saying, like having high standards for work, not just professionally, but academically for all ages, you know, like young children or, you know, adult children as myself that have had incarcerated parents, like really push back on like, what are we demanding of our youth right now? You know, is it hard to focus in school? Is it hard to show up for work? Like, how do we really truly support people and holding them to this high standard that they need to keep going on with their lives as if nothing's really happening, I think is so harmful. And so having like these larger conversations about like what services and resources we need to support people in being able to take care of themselves as they're experiencing this trauma is super important. And not just that, having like those greater conversations about what resources are available, but actually going out there and providing the resources, right? Like doing the advocacy, pushing for policy changes. And then also too, like Lateefah said, it's both of those things. It's pushing for advocacy and also providing direct services. And how can we how can we support organizations that are providing those direct services, who are, you know, providing children with hotspots so they have, you know, reliable internet when they're working from home, who are providing children with, you know, therapy services that are helping children stay connected to their parents that are incarcerated during this time, especially because visiting is halted. So really, one, having that conversation, the greater awareness is going to help. And then two, providing resources. And then as far as the harm goes, being mindful of what we're expecting of people right now is what I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Alyssa. I hear so much from both you and Anthony about the importance of like that there's acknowledgement, like actually explicit acknowledgement and about what is happening, an inquiry that really is about what do people need. And I want to ask Allison also the same question, certainly from your position and vantage point. Just what do you see as the harms and the helps in this work?
Yeah, I wanted to build on both what Alyssa and Anthony said, and thinking about, you know, acknowledging and seeing the children. But we have to be very careful that we, as those who work with children and families, and you know, whether it be at a school or a community-based organization, that people do some internal work first. Because what I see can be very harmful for children is that if a child does disclose, which often they don't because of the stigma associated with incarceration, they're probably told, you know, don't go to that school and tell the teacher that your mom's in jail, right? But if they do disclose that even those with the best intentions, they don't know how to respond because they don't have the tools in their toolboxes, because they might have implicit biases and negative thoughts about who is incarcerated. They may think that if they're incarcerated, that means that they're bad. Whereas we know, those of us who've had incarcerated family members, that people aren't bad, they make bad decisions, right? And so I think that the first thing that people should do is to do some self-reflection, to think about the biases that they may have around people who are incarcerated, around specific crimes, so that when children and families do come to them, that they aren't uncomfortable, you know, that their response is a supportive one. I've heard people tell children, don't talk about that, you know, and right there, that stigmatizes them and makes the child feel bad. So what really can help children is for the adults and caregivers in the organizations and schools that they're interfacing with to be able to respond with, well, you know, how are you? How can I support you? You know, don't ask questions about the crime or why their parent is there. Ask the question to the child, how can I support you? And let the child guide that conversation. You know, partner with community-based organizations or BASIP to learn about resources that are in the community so that you can provide children and families with actual concrete tools to help them navigate their experience.
Thank you, Allison. I'm I'm sort of looking at as I can, like, the attendee list, the panelists. And so in the multitasking, just also thinking of, and, I think just want to share and also acknowledge as someone who has not had direct experience with parental incarceration, what it means for me to be in my position, in my organization, in my community, and what I want to call on and offer maybe for those of us who are also not proximate is that our job is to support those who are most proximate. And our job is to do the internal work of that Allison mentioned about what have we been conditioned to sort of learn and understand and assume, and how do we sort of catch that for ourselves. So it's our internal work that also needs to be institutionalized organizationally into the culture. So yes, as someone who works with young people who I have not the same experience, how do I support those who have and make sure they have they need and not question it? I might ask questions, but it actually creates more harm when I question or hold suspicious. So, just want to offer that given kind of who is in this community right now, that it will probably move us to have to challenge ourselves, our assumptions, and actually call on us even to take risks in the work that we thought we might not have to otherwise. I'm seeing a number of questions come in, and I know, Anthony, you answered this, but I actually would want to ask this question to all. And I mean, I love that we're totally going off script, because part of this work is like, how do we not follow the path that's been created? But there was a question about, what fears do you have? How do you sort of get the courage to talk about from your own experience to the extent that you're comfortable, and from your position? So Anthony, I don't know if you'd like to share more and to start us off, but to talk more about that.
So the question was, am I afraid? What are your fears, and how may you find courage, and what brings you comfort? I currently worked up the courage to advocate due to my involvement in my community. Because at such a young age, I was introduced to policies and sort of developed the understanding of how the system works. And that is not just me going through problems and like the world is just out to get me and my family. Like, I understand that it's a certain way of things. So I'm no longer afraid to just say what's bothering me, or like what's an issue if it's not morally correct. And I think the courage comes from seeing the success and the bills, like the hard work that goes into preparing to go to Albany and prepare to speak to the politicians and to lobby with them, to rally. Just being involved, that really honed my courage and made me comfortable.
Thank you, Anthony.
Can I just share? I think Anthony undersold himself, but he said he's gone to Albany with the Youth Action Council. Albany is the state capital in New York. And he and the rest of the Youth Action Council have been advocating for quite some time, some years, to have a bill passed in New York that would require the New York State prison system to consider where children are and place incarcerated parents in the prison closest to those children. And because of his work and his advocacy and his sharing his own personal story and moving hearts and minds, the New York State Legislature passed this bill in July. And so we are now just waiting for the governor to sign it, which we're encouraged that he will. And so not only is Anthony courageous, but he's transforming the criminal justice system in real time.
That's right. Thank you for sharing that, Allison, and thank you, Anthony. And I know, I think Alyssa, you mentioned the sort of the expectations that young people have to do double work, right? And there's not even a guarantee that you'll get what you need in doing that. And so I just want to acknowledge what that means for both of you, especially, of doing the work and doing the work that is really about movement and legacy and generation, and still you deserve to have had and have magical childhoods. I just want to name and acknowledge that too, as we're here asking you to be on this panel and share and work, but also just opening up to Alyssa and like fears. Where do you get the courage? You know, because I think part of what we're lacking is courage and risk taking in this work, right? That gets lost because we can't translate that into logic models or measures of success, right? So that's what we need to talk about. How do we visibilize your courage?
Ooh, that's a lot. Yeah, that's a lot. You know, I was jotting down some notes about what Lateefah was sharing in her keynote, and she said that children of incarcerated parents are the soldiers in a war that they didn't start, and that really stuck home for me. And I think that I don't know how I would answer like what my fears are. I think like my fears are, you know, as part of my work, like I said, I call and I talk to parents. One of my projects right now, we mail books to children on behalf of their incarcerated family members as presents to like keep some connection going during COVID. And sometimes my heart just breaks, you know, when I'm listening to kids in the backgrounds, because I'm going, wow, like I'm 25 years older than some of these children, and in an ideal world, like my generation should have been the last to be impacted by this. There shouldn't have been any generation, but just really kind of being scared that this is something that's just going to keep going, that these kids aren't going to be the last that have, you know, parents in prison. And I don't mean just like individual, I mean on a mass scale, like, you know, millions of children in this country, and just being terrified that, you know, 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be just the next generation of children experiencing the same thing. So I hope that like my work and, you know, the work of, you know, strong advocates like Anthony, like as we go forward in this lifetime, really pushing for that to be different, pushing for decarceration, pushing for children to have contact with their parents when their parents are incarcerated. And then one thing I would say that really gives me courage is all of those kids that we get to help and we get to push for change for them right now. You know, I was on the phone with a guardian or a parent last week, and the little girl, her daughter, took the phone and she said, "Are you the woman who's gonna mail me a book for my daddy?" And I just melted, you know, and I'm like, yes, what do you want? Anything, you can have it, you know. And she's telling me she wants a book about foxes and dogs and animals. And just, you know, Lateefah said too that children of incarcerated parents really teach us how to love. And that statement really stuck with me too, because I think the parent-child bonds are so strong and they can transcend the prison walls. And so how do we uplift those stories too? We don't just talk about the adversity. We don't just talk about the issues. Like those are important, but also talking about stories of strength and resilience and love and bonds that aren't broken, you know, and bonds that continue to be strengthened by the direct work of advocates of, you know, people like CS Support Us or the Bay Area Children of Incarcerated Parents Partnership. Like, how do we uplift the positive in this too? Like all of the resilience.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm like, can we just stay here all day together? Allison, did you want to speak to fears, courage, harm, the necessary risk-taking?
Yeah, I'd like to build on the great point that Alyssa was making. We really need to flip the script on the narratives that we have for any child that's going through a challenging experience. We need to think about the language we use. You know, think about, you know, they're like at risk and target populations. I mean, we're talking about children, and children succeed and thrive when they're supported, right? And too often we focus on what's wrong, and we don't look at, as Alyssa said, like the resiliency, you know, what goes well. You know, I don't want to candy coat it and say that 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 there aren't struggles and it isn't challenging. And, you know, Alyssa pointed out that family bonds are strong and they transcend walls, but, you know, every child and family is different and children have different relationships. Some children have no relationship. So we have to honor the diversity of the experience of having a parent who's involved in the criminal legal system, and acknowledge the challenges, but to really amplify the successes and amplify what supports help families succeed. There is research that shows that teachers who know that a student has an incarcerated parent have lower expectations for them. Now, why is that? It's because in our culture, when we talk about incarceration, it's very negative. You know, there's all these false narratives that children won't succeed, but we know that most children do succeed. So we need to focus more on what helps children thrive instead of focusing on the smaller percentage of children who don't succeed, while also acknowledging that it is a tough experience and it is hard to navigate and there's a lot of diversity, and Alyssa's experience isn't the same as Anthony's experience.
Thank you. How do we hold all the fortitude, all the pain, all the complexity and textures that don't get sliced and diced again into program outcomes and objectives? Yeah, that is the work. I'm looking at some of the questions from folks. Here's a question. It's for Allison, but again, I'm gonna open these up to everybody, but and you started talking about this. If you had a magic wand, what type of support would you like to see in the community? And I think if anyone had a magic, yeah, but please, Allison, start us off.
Oh, my magic wand, I think Lateefah pointed on it earlier. I would reimagine the criminal legal system without prisons, right? You know, we know, and there's research that has emerged that shows that, you know, our over-reliance on punishment paradigm and incarceration in this country is not helping. It's not healing. It's not healing for survivors. As Alyssa and Anthony has already pointed out, it breaks families, it breaks bonds. And there are other ways that we can respond to law breaking. You know, so many people who commit crimes are doing so because there's an underlying social issue, right? And so we're responding to issues of mental illness, to poverty, to homelessness with incarceration. And other countries do respond in different ways. You know, when there is a person who's addicted to drugs and they get caught with drugs, they're not sent to jail or prison, they're given rehabilitation. So my magic wand would be to really just start all over again, because when parents are swept up in the system, it affects children. And in order for children to succeed, they need their parents to succeed, and they need a system that responds to the law breaking in a healing and restorative way.
Thank you. Anthony, Alyssa, magic wands you'd like to?
Yeah, I would choose to address with my magic wand. It would have to be the issue of healthcare, like making it more affordable to more people and bringing more awareness to like the whole issue of COVID-19, because it really affected my relationship with my father. So it's like, I know it's affecting other people as well in different ways.
Thank you. Alyssa, did you want to also answer that?
Sure, I'll just be really, really brief. If I had a magic wand, I think I would shift the narrative of children of incarcerated parents, like we were kind of talking about in that last question, and like Allison touched on really beautifully about the diverse experiences of children of incarcerated parents. And also, you know, like one thing that comes up a lot is, well, if the person really cared about their family, then they wouldn't have been incarcerated. Like, that tears at my soul when people say stuff like that. And so really just pushing for an attitude shift and seeing children as what they are, which is children, and like, you know, innocent in this criminal justice legal system that we have in the country, being like innocent victims of it, and seeing that, you know, we all feel like we have a greater social responsibility to address the things like Allison was talking about, you know, like poverty, addiction, all the sociological factors that go into why someone is incarcerated in the first place. And then how do we collectively as a society, as a country, support children so that they can be successful during those times and support them in all their varying different needs. So.
Thank you. I'm looking at another question, and this was specifically for Anthony, and again, opening it up. So for Anthony first, what type of programs helped you through your parents' incarceration? What type of programs helped you? That was the question.
The type of programs that helped me are the Youth Action Council, Youth Experience Success, and Echoes of Incarceration, and Boy Scouts of America. Those are the top 4 programs that come to mind immediately. Because, what was the second part of the question? I'm so sorry.
That was the question. What programs helped you?
Do you guys want like a background of those programs, or like
share a little bit about some of them?
Okay. With all of the programs, they offered a support system throughout my early adolescence, and they helped me hone my communication skills, and they helped me build my network, helped me to understand the importance of helping others. And the work that I did in those programs, I can't really explain it, but all of those after school programs really like shaped who I am today.
Well, just to build a little bit on the programs that Anthony mentioned, I think that it's important to point out to folks that, with the exception of the Boy Scouts, all of those programs were specifically for children whose parents have been involved in the criminal legal system. And we find, and I'm sure that many on this call who work directly with families affected by incarceration know that because of the stigma, it's hard to talk about it. But when you're in an after-school program where everybody else there has had an incarcerated parent, it kind of makes it easier to be real, right? You know, I know of instances where Youth Action Council has started up for the fall, and a young lady walks in and she sees somebody at her school and she's like, "You too?" You know, they were at school and they had support and they could have been there for each other, but it was the Youth Action Council that brought them together. We have recreational programs for younger children at the Osborne Association, where they go on a monthly outing, and they just do fun stuff, but they're with other children who've experienced parental incarceration. And their parents in the community and caregivers in their community also go. And so while the kids are having fun and just being kids, the parents and caregivers are, you know, off on the sidelines, able to find that support and to network. And so developing programs that are specifically for families who've been affected by the criminal legal system can be very empowering and really just allow people to be honest and to seek the support that they need, that they otherwise might be hesitant to ask for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. So what tools and support systems are missing to support children of incarcerated parents, I think was the question. One thing for me, and I can speak from my own personal experience for this question, is that I found growing up that in education, teachers didn't necessarily have the tools to talk to me about my father's incarceration, and they were really like the first institution or system that, you know, as a young Black and brown child, I was coming up against. And so I didn't receive a lot of support, or really any, during that time. And so I know that there are some efforts. I couldn't name them for you. I know, like Allison, we have like these larger conversations about like pushing for teachers to have the tools and the resources. And that's something that like CS Support Us does with their campaign in October, is like giving educators resources to talk to children with incarcerated parents. But something like that, where maybe like it's mandatory for teachers to get some training on like, how do you talk to children who have parents that are incarcerated, and how do you do it in a way that's like supportive and, you know, like Allison said, not in a way that's going to hold them to like a lower expectation for what they can achieve educationally. You know, like when I was applying to college, people would be like, oh, that's a reach for you, you shouldn't go there. Just like these weird, like disparaging comments that I would get, that I think people made based on how they perceived me because of my life experiences. And when you get comments like that, tying it back to that earlier question, like it's hard to take risks, it's hard to feel supported, it's hard to feel empowered, like it's hard to really feel like you can make changes in your own life, let alone in your community. And so looking back, like what's going to help children, what's going to help youth, what's going to help adult children of incarcerated parents feel empowered in their lives, I think is maybe missing. But I also don't want to discourage the efforts of people that are working on that.
Thank you. I want to again thank you for, you know, fielding all these questions. Also, you know, in this forum on Zoom, it's such a, you know, for such a conversation that it's like we want to have it together, right? This is so about building beloved relationships, to build loving power, but we're on such a sort of disembodied platform. But given that, I do want to actually also invite and ask our attendees, as our panelists have been so forthcoming to tell the truth, to share, to ask that, you know, in the chat, to even share like what's an aha, what's maybe an unlearning that you have to do from here now that you know, just what's coming up for you as panelists, because this work is mutual. We have to shift it from being transactional to transformational, to even beyond that, to being about liberation and freedom. So we really want to hear and see the chat for our attendees. What are you learning? What are you taking away? Even what risks are you going to take, so we can support you and give cover for that as well. I'm looking at some of the other questions, and I see there's also some resources in the chat as well. So thank you for putting those in there. There are some specific questions that you may or may not know, but we can also follow up. There's a question about what financial resources are available to those of us who've inherited an insane amount of student loan debt due to having incarcerated parents. Does anyone know, want to take that on? If other, oh, go ahead, Allison.
I don't have an answer for that, but I will say that I just, as a related, that I know that there are in some various states across the country efforts out there to provide scholarships to students that are going to college, but as far as any type of loan forgiveness or support paying those off, I'm not aware of anything.
Thank you.
I just want to second that too, and encourage, you know, those, if there are any you know, children of incarcerated parents on this call, or even adult children of incarcerated parents, like there are a lot of, as Allison said, like scholarship opportunities and funding for educational expenses out there. And I just encourage people to really be honest about your truth and your stories. There are people who do want to help and do want to help you succeed. And so I talk to people a lot that they keep this part of themselves hidden from the world because they're afraid of the stigma. Like, don't be scared, use your voice. There are people that want to uplift you and share your story, and like, you never know what resources are going to come your way to help you reach your goals. So just a word of encouragement.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question before we close out. And again, closing out this time together, certainly we are not closing out the work. But a question that has come up in the chat is, are there any ways the systems can facilitate visitations for incarcerated parents right now? How have children and youth worked to stay in touch during the pandemic? You've touched on some of that, but feel free to, you know, reiterate and also to add. and to tell us what you need to make sure that that can happen.
For me personally, there's been times before COVID where I would go to the public library and I would utilize their video visiting service. That was when my father was at Rikers Island. And I'm not sure if that's still going on, but that was a great way to keep in contact with him, whether it be over the phone. Like, I would prefer in-person visits, but that helped.
Yeah, I would share, if you live in a state or a community where there isn't the option for video visiting, especially free video visiting, because in New York, all of our video visiting is free. I would encourage you to reach out to your local jail or the state prison system to inquire, like, you know, how do we get this and how do we get free video visiting, since so much of the video visiting that exists is for profit. There's also partnerships that community-based organizations or even a group of people in the community can do to provide transportation to the facilities. Prisons are often hours away in remote areas that are inaccessible by public transportation. And in New York and in California, there are programs that will take children to visits, but they're not frequent enough. And children who want and need to see their incarcerated parents need more consistent contact. You know, going just on Mother's Day or going on just on Father's Day is not enough. And then the other thing that I would like to flag is the importance of having child-friendly visiting practices actually inside the prison and jail, everywhere from the point of screening to the actual visiting itself. We advocate for contact visiting, where children can actually hug their parent and sit in their laps. I know that many jails has the plexiglass, but there are ways that children can be prepared to have that visit. There are some jails, including some in New York State, that actually have a special visiting program for children where they don't have to visit their parent through the glass, and they're able to actually visit in a room with toys where they can have a more regular interaction.
And Allison, would you mind also sharing more about See Us, Support Us?
Absolutely. So I know that Alyssa has mentioned See Us, Support Us a few times. Thank you, Alyssa. You know, as has been discussed, and Alyssa also mentioned, children are largely invisible, right? You know, I can't tell you how many times we've gone to a school and said that we want to talk about how to support students with incarcerated parents, and the principal says, well, we don't have those kids here. But it's just by the sheer statistics that Lateefah had shared at the top of the summit, you know, 1 in 14 children have an incarcerated parent. And when you look at children of color, those rates increase. And so we know that there's a child with an incarcerated parent that's in every classroom. And so for that reason, we launched See Us, Support Us. You know, the See Us is to make children visible, and the Support Us is to give people tools and specific actions that they can take to better support children. Every year we have a theme, and this year's theme is supporting children's educational success and well-being from early childhood through college. So how do you get involved in See Us, Support Us? I put a link to the See Us, Support Us website in the chat box. We're in the process of still adding a lot of material and content to it because See Us, Support Us officially launches October 1st. So I invite you to go to the website, check it out, go back often. We update it throughout the year and put content up. So after October, you can still go there. There's a resource toolkit. There's an art gallery that shows all the amazing creative talents that children of incarcerated parents have. We celebrate their successes. Children write blogs and poems. Anthony's got a poem on the See Us, Support Us website. Well, I think it's not up there yet. It will be, so you have to go back and at least check that out. I'm sure Alyssa's going to be contributing some content as well. We have partners across the country, including BASIP, who's been one of, Carol has been a champion and pioneer in this work, and she is part of See Us, Support Us, as well as some states across the country. We invite you to follow See Us, Support Us on social media as well. You can find out all the information on the website.
Fantastic. I know we're going to be looking for that at RYSE, so thank you. Alyssa, Anthony.
Can you repeat the question again? It was just what? Feels like a long time ago.
What can systems or organizations or those, you know, or even sort of those of us sort of in and connected to the work, what can we do to have actually both the ability, access, and also sort of culture of care and connection for families? What can we do? We know what you're doing. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Do we need to also be doing that? Should we replicate it? What do we need to do?
That's a really big question. I like what our other panelists have have said as far as like finding your local resources, or, you know, tapping into organizations that are working on these issues to see like what is available in your area. I saw that one family put something in the chat box about facilitating parent-child video visits right now. I do want to put the plug in for an organization called Emilio. And I will put the link in the chat. So Emilio is a free service, and it's a website, and you upload a letter and they mail it to anyone in the US incarcerated for free. And I believe you get maybe 7 free letters per week or maybe per month. Don't quote me on that. It should be on the website somewhere, but that's a free tool for families. So if you can't afford, you know, to print something, you can't afford envelopes, you know, postage is very expensive. Like, that's something anyone can sign up for. If you're an organization listening on this call, you know, share that with your networks, share that with your families. That's just one more resource to limit the cost of family communication. And we know that family communication is very important. On the larger scale, just also putting in a plug, there are so many organizations that are doing direct services to keep families connected. You know, some were mentioned in the chat too, you know, A Place for Grace, Project Avery. You know, I don't know the demographics of like where people are located in this call as far as like the attendees go, but look around your community, what organizations are working on issues of children incarcerated parents and like keeping families connected during the pandemic, especially. You know, like, donate your time and your resources to organizations like that. You know, like, ask your friends and family, post it on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on, you know, social media. Like, you push for this larger conversation on how we can support children incarcerated parents just in general. And then I will also put my program's information in the chat box. We send books, like I mentioned, to children under 18 on behalf of their incarcerated parent. Anyone in California right now, we haven't extended past California, and it's completely free. There's no cost per family. There's no limit either. So if you have 4 children in your family who have an incarcerated brother, father, grandparent, you know, sibling, mother, sister, like anyone, we will send them a book, and it comes with a personalized card that says it's from their incarcerated loved one. And then if you mail us back a photo of the child holding their gift from their incarcerated loved one, we then print out the photo and mail it back into the carceral facility. So the incarcerated loved one has like a photo of the child with a description of the book we sent. So it's really cool. It comes full circle. I'll put this in the chat so you can reach out to our organization and we can facilitate that for you, or we can give you a flyer if you want to share that with your families as well.
Amazing, thank you. And I want folks to know we are going to be following up with information about our panelists, about the programs, about the resources. So I know the chat can move fast sometimes, but have no fear, we will get all the information out to you. And as we close out, really just wanted to make sure we had space for all of you, any of you, to share. Was there something we didn't ask, something that you feel, and it doesn't have to be connected to any of this, but just anything you want to share that you feel like is important to say out loud and for us as we close out the panel? Anything else?
Well, I'll just say join SIA Support Us this October to learn more about everything we spoke about today.
Will do. Thank you. Alyssa or Anthony, do you have any closing comments?
Hey, thank you guys for having me, and hearing what I had to say. I appreciate you. That's on.
Thank you, Anthony.
I just want to say thank you to CDF and the BASIP for putting us together and continuing to be leaders and advocating for system-impacted children. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know it's hard, we can't hear each other clapping or snapping, but you know, any of us who are on, please do that. You can hoot and holler on your own too. It's all in the air, we all feel it. Thank you so much. Again, the medicine continues in this space. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to learn, work, and take those risks with all of you. So I'm going to hand it back over, I think, to Shimica or Carol or both of you. Also, I want to say, Shimica, I don't think I acknowledged you at the beginning, and I want to both apologize and also acknowledge and just share. I appreciate, we've been in so many spaces like this, and I continue to just really appreciate the space to be here with you and all of you. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Carol's going to help close us out.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to say thank you to the moderator, to the panelists. This was very rich and informing, and it was also healing. As we close out this session, I want to just personally acknowledge Shimica Gaston and also Janice, who have from the CDF, Children's Defense Fund. They've been a great partner and a great collaborator. And as we move into See Us Support Us Month, I ask all of you to reach out to learn more about how we can support our children and those families and those family connections, and help to remove the barriers that cause harm and disruption. So with that, again, I want to thank our collaborative partners. On behalf of Bay Area Children of Incarcerated Parents, we'd like to invite you to join our partnership meetings and also to stay in touch. So have a good day. And again, thank you to Shimica and the entire Children's Defense Fund of California team.
Thank you, Carol. And I think we also want to extend our thanks to BASIP for the collaboration and partnership. It's been a wonderful opportunity to continue to work together and bring these conversations to the forefront. We hope to have more partnership and future summits together. And I just want to again reiterate how grateful we are to our panelists, our youth, to Kanwarpal, to Lateefah for joining us and making sure that the voices of community are being heard by a wider audience. I also wanted to put a plug in for this Thursday. We are hosting a pre-screening of a documentary produced by Stacey Abrams called All In, The Fight for Democracy. We'll put it in the chat as well if those are interested. It will air on Amazon Prime, but we know our community often doesn't have access to these other luxuries, so we want to make sure that people can see it if they have the opportunity. So thank you all again. Thank you for joining us. We hope to be back soon in the future with more conversation.